Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining this session, which is titled The SOC and the NOC. Find out how Akamai and VMware use automation to maintain a tight collaboration between frontline responders and their stakeholders. My name is Aaron Young, and I'll be your monitor for this session. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our session monitor, Christopher Taylor. So Chris Taylor is the VP of cybersecurity at 3Tree Tech, which is a Fortune 1000 tech scouting firm. As a technology veteran specializing in cybersecurity, he solves specific challenges with technology disruptors to help organizations become more secure, more efficient, and ultimately more profitable. Chris, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Aaron. Hello, everyone, and welcome to BigPanda's Resolve 22 discussion on the NOC and SOC. And today we have two big hitters serving as the panel for this discussion. I'll start by introducing Roger Barranco, VP of Global Customer Operations at Akamai. Roger has extensive experience running multiple technical operations departments globally. Roger also serves Akamai's Tier 1 customers in mission-critical environments. Roger was formerly VP of Service Delivery, where he ran security operations, compliance, and provisioning. Before that, Roger ran his own company called Computer Processing Technologies, an electronic medical claim processing service. Roger also holds a patent for disparate cloud access methodologies. And I'd like to also introduce Craig Bowman, who leads all of federal sales for VMware. Craig is the guy in the world of cybersecurity. Craig formerly ran the entire cybersecurity division for Verizon and was one of the best offensive technical collection officers for the DoD for 10 years. And when our three-letter organizations need to make the impossible possible, they call Craig Bowman. So we're going to jump into the NOC and SOC. And if we have time left over, I'd be honored if Craig Bowman and Roger Barranco can share whatever they can as they both see the most severe nation-state cyber attacks against the United States. All right, so let's talk about the NOC and SOC. In large enterprise organizations today, there's still a clear separation between NOC and SOC. Now it's NOC, SOC, and app developer. SecDevOps can produce massive alerts, and SOCs, they don't know how to handle this. So let's start with our first question for Craig Bowman. Craig, how do you see the culture of NOC and SOC today?
Good question. So I think that what we're seeing is the organizations, right, corporations are trying to find ways to get the NOCs and the SOCs to work more closely together. And that's primarily because it's very difficult to monitor environments that aren't working together. And so, I think there's a desire there to get them to work together. But culturally, I think that what we saw at Verizon was that the culture of the people actually operating in the NOC and in the SOC really don't have the same interest in being part of the same organization often. They were, many of them were trained in switches and routers, and others were trained in different tools to identify threats. And so those two cultures are sometimes difficult to put together.
Right.
I'd say as the organization is maybe a smaller organization or one that's going through transformation, the merging into a NOSC type of environment becomes a whole lot easier because you can dictate a little bit more, to the culture that, hey, this is the way we're going to do things, and you can adjust with hiring to kind of work around any culture issues. But I still think that even in an environment where you're merging a NOC and a SOC together, you still have the challenge of the tool sets and the dashboards and the things that we traditionally monitored those different environments. And so you end up having many times a portal that's isolated for the NOC and a portal that's isolated for the SOC. And yet we call it a NOSC. Everybody's working together, yet the dashboards are still very different. So I'll start there and then maybe pass it off to see if Roger has anything to say.
Yeah, Roger, same question. How do you see the future of NOC and SOC today? Got a little background noise. If you can switch your speaker, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Back to that static there, Roger.
Yeah, I'd try to.
Very good. I flipped inputs
Perfect.
here.
There you go.
All right.
Perfect.
Thank you. So, I agree. With the smaller organization, it may work because in a smaller organization, the NOC SOC may be more of a triage only type group. But if you're expecting that group to go beyond triage and do alert enrichment and actually engage the proper groups and contribute with the problem solution, for me, a combined team of both the NOC and SOC greatly dilutes capabilities and effectiveness. In my humble opinion, They're very different disciplines, both of which deserve subject matter expertise. The bigger concern is the negative impact is on the enterprise. So if they're in some kind of budgetary crunch and they are forced to combine them, I think they're going to be forced to accept a lower level of quality output from that combined team as compared to two individual teams.
Yeah, no, that's a good answer, Roger. Thank you. And Craig, how do you see these teams working together? I know you kind of answered that a little bit, but how do you see them working together in the future?
Yeah, so I think that there's a new element that's being introduced to this whole kind of conversation, which is sec DevOps.
Right.
And so, if we look at how sec DevOps is being stood up now, the Network Operations Center, very traditional. We're used to it. Everybody's comfortable with it. Even with the SOC, things are stood up. A lot of the telemetry we're taking from switches and routers and endpoints and stuff, and feeding it into whatever our SIM tool is. And we're managing tier 1 and tier 2 and tier 3 tickets. And in comes sec DevOps.
Yeah.
And it's a whole different beast, because now what you have is you've got applications running in probably a Kubernetes environment, and different tool sets, whether it be the tool sets that are in the pre-release or in the actual runtime environment, are throwing off alerts to, theoretically, if they're even being captured by the SOC, they're alerts being thrown to the SOC operator, which has no idea how to manage them. Right? They don't have playbooks written for them. They're not trained on how to respond to them, and even if they were, they're not developers. And so they're going to get an incident and they might elevate it, but the elevation might be directly to the apps team. And then the apps team by that time probably already even knows it exists, because their tools are alerting separately from their SIM. And so I think that, when I look at what's needed, is we need a way to bring those different kind of like lenses for the different environments together in a more cohesive way. Not a single portal with 3 tabs, one that says infrastructure, one that says applications. It's got to be more integrated, where we can triage this stuff faster.
Okay. Yeah, no, thank you, Craig. It was good. And so, Roger, your next question. So, how do you view Akamai's role in consumption of data by consumers?
So, broad question, right? So if I'm going to cheat a little bit and tie that back to compliance, it really ties back to how your entity or your company sets up roles within the company. So to cheat a little bit, so from PCI, it's not unusual to hear people say, hey, if you're PCI certified, that means you have zero access to a credit card number. That's absolutely not true. If you have the appropriate role, you can have the highest degree of access to the most sensitive data, way more sensitive than a credit card number, right? So it's according to your role. So it ties subsequently back to policy. So to answer your question, my suggestion would be that companies have the right roles. They obviously have to have the right policies in place that talks to how that data is there. And then you have to have really strong tooling around it to handle things like data deprecation of PII, different pieces that move along with that. What we do, by the way, that ties to our alerting systems as well as our ticketing systems, for example, is we automatically have a timed scrub of what it determines to be PII. So individual IP addresses, as an example. So it goes beyond, so we're super comfortable with dealing with the customer traffic and the customer data. But we also are very dependent on tooling to make sure that we're in alignment with those policies. And it's not just a human thinking, oh, I did a PCAP and I shouldn't put that on my local PC, as an example.
Gotcha. Okay. No, that's a good answer. And a little bit deeper, how is Akamai sending alerts to both NOC and SOC, and do you see it as manageable today?
Okay, so here, just to level set what happens in our environment. On a very busy day, we process about 250 terabits per second from a volume perspective. On a daily basis, that's 2 trillion transactions. And from a security perspective, so far I ran a quick report. As of up to the beginning of the month, there were 8 billion security blocks put in place. That's an unmanageable number.
That's unmanageable.
Yeah, so we approach it from the perspective of leaning heavily on platform resiliency to automatically respond to different problems that happen out there, and then subsequently prioritize what do we have to look at. And what we have to look at is in a specific order of, is it actionable? Is it timely? And is it enriched? So the thought of a human being going, oh, I got alert A, now let me go look in these different databases to try to make correlations makes me somewhat nauseous, right? The alert comes out, we know there's subsequent steps. You have to perform all those things in your workflow automations, and your tooling and alerting system should help you with that dramatically.
Got it. Thank you. And as I say this next piece, your microphone, that was a little bit of a static there, so you might just check your mic. And so while you do that, so security is about security. Security is about securing data and sending data to consumers securely and efficiently. Security is also about sending data to IoT, data to apps, data to users. So, Roger, I think it's impressive that Akamai delivers performance enhancers and security at the same time, especially considering security can expectedly add a layer of latency in many environments. So, just to take that a little bit deeper, how does Akamai get updates on latency problems or security vulnerabilities?
So that our platform runs this tool it happens to be called Mapper.
Okay.
And Mapper is always probing, always running tests constantly. And it's going to 250,000 different plus endpoints in our network globally. And when it detects something that's latency oriented, in addition to letting the NOC know, it also is modifying the infrastructure to say, well, how do we get around that fiber cut? How do we get around that particular problem that exists that's created momentary latency? And then to the heavier degree of, do we need to remove what we call a zone in the infrastructure, right? So, hey, I want to take traffic and I want to concentrate it to get around a problem, or I want to spread it out, right? So that mapper makes that decision and the platform responds. So it's kind of a mindset change to say, hey, versus telling me about latency and figuring out how I may want to put some intelligent routing in place to get around it, how do I have automation in place on the platform that can adapt and change? Again, yet another alert enrichment component that your alerting system should help you with is to how it subsequently impacts the platform to make changes for you, not involving a human necessarily, other than the human to perform a quality check.
Right. That kind of segues into what I was going to ask you. What's that? What's that, Craig?
Yeah, Chris, I was going to say something interesting. Yeah. Roger said there was 250 terabytes a day. I mean, one of the things you mentioned was, is it manageable?
Right.
And, just think about that. Akamai, 250 terabytes a day. That's just Akamai.
Yes.
I mean, if you look at the edge network, and the NOC and the SOC is interesting. So in the NOC, you've got edge networks, right? So layer 7 identification, anything north or south, internet, load balancers, firewalls, Akamai, all of that data, all of that telemetry, all of that information being fed into some kind of a SIM-like environment. But then you've got the internal traffic, right? All the east-west traffic, right? So then with those, you've got the IDPSs and the traffic analysis and all that. So all of those tools, just for the NOC, we're just talking about the NOC at this point, is feeding all that telemetry in to try to be understood. And then that's just for the NOC. Now, if we look at the SOC, we're talking about all the endpoints, right? We're looking for attacks like all the workloads, all the applications. And there we're looking at, hey, we're looking for file modifications and registry modifications and DLL injections, and all that's being fed in to your SIM. And then lastly, if you have like a mature SOC, maybe you also have identity and access management and device registration and all that stuff. And so how do you make sense of that much data being thrust into a portal that we expect human beings to be able to triage? And what we found in general is it's almost like the TSA security.
How so?
Right? Is how many times do you look at the same kind of bag before you just become sort of mute or sort of like conditioned just to hit that next button? How do we test it? Human beings, it makes it difficult. It really does. And one of the things that's interesting I think about BigPanda
as you're stating this, Roger, you may
Yeah,
want
go
to
ahead.
check your mic again. There's a little bit of static on the line. Just Roger, hit mute or just switch back your mic. Sorry, Craig, keep trucking.
No worries. Yeah, I was looking up BigPanda because I didn't know a lot about them. But the fact that they take all this other data and they inject it into the data we're collecting to try to find correlation
Yep.
is something that personally I want to dig into. I want to look at the actual algorithms they're using. I want to see how they're taking this data to enrich just the noise that's happening within the knock sock so that we can get to a more manageable kind of like actionable item so that we don't overwhelm our SOC analysts with things where they just start hitting the next button, right? And it's even worse is that we sort of like we incentivize our SOC analysts based on how many tickets they can manage. How many tickets do they close? And that's like a recipe for disaster. Like if you want to really get poor security, incentivize your SOC analysts on how many tickets they close. They'll close
Right.
a lot of tickets. They'll
Right.
close them like crazy.
You're
And
right.
so
Yeah.
how do we make what they close more meaningful? So I think that's what's really interesting about at least what I saw within BigPanda.
Yeah, no, you're spot on, Craig. That was a good nugget. And so, to you, Craig, everybody knows, VMware virtualizes servers. So where is your role in the knock and sock,
Mhm.
and just anything else to add? Like, how do you ingest data from other systems?
That's a good question. So I think VMware, I'm fairly new to VMware, but I'll tell you that I knew VMware as the company that developed VMs and vSphere and NSX and that kind of stuff. And it's a very mature area. I think what's interesting is how they've expanded so that they can virtualize entire data centers. So you're not limited to one on-prem, but it could be a data center virtually that exists in multiple locations in multiple clouds, but you manage it from the same kind of vSphere interface.
Okay.
So you're doing the same things you're used to doing, and behind the scenes, it's going out and breaching all kinds of environments to make it easy to manage very complex environments. So that's very interesting. And one of the ways that I think that we've partnered with BigPanda is that they take our telemetry to try to make sense as one of the feeds that we feed as part of that virtualization architecture. On the second bucket, I would say, we acquired Pivotal, one of the largest SecDevOps companies.
Mhm.
And so all the telemetry that comes out of publishing Kubernetes and containers gets fed in to a traditional kind of SIEM environment, through some kind of a connection kit. And in this case of BigPanda, it would be through BigPanda's API infrastructure. And then lastly, we acquired Carbon Black, one of the largest endpoint detection companies. And so obviously that's going to be a very 1-to-1 ratio of feeding a SOC all the endpoint detection stuff.
Right.
So virtualizing cloud and data centers into a software-defined data center, SecDevOps, very, very mature product that was acquired, and then Carbon Black, very mature product. All three of those kind of get fed into data feeds that people are using.
Awesome. That's those are good nuggets. And Roger, do you have anything to share? I know Craig just went through a few points, but just how do you take data from your knock and sock, and how are people integrating that today?
Yeah, very much in alignment with everything that was recently said. But one reason, or one of the main deciding points that we went with BigPanda was because of the ML, the machine learning, and the AI component. Our concern was, hey, we could be really good about this is an alert, this is a certain condition. We know that we need to respond to this. We know that we need to log it, but you don't know what you don't know, right?
Right.
We all in that NOC environment choose to ignore low priority alerts.
Uh-huh.
But what happens in that if there are 15 low priority alerts for a certain endpoint, does that suddenly warrant an escalation? Probably, right? And that's where we're very excited about working, more with BigPanda, is to take advantage of that ML AI type of environment to make us aware of what we may have in the past missed because we would have thought, oh, this is just a low priority issue.
Right. And then what I like about BigPanda additionally is the open box machine learning, where your teams can share that tribal knowledge, because there's a lot of tools in this space that say they can solve this problem. But what we've seen as the unbiased consultant is historically they're really not saving people from those bridge calls from where. So I do like the open box machine learning component. This next question is for both of you guys to kind of to go a little bit deeper. What's needed for AI and automation to work properly for your organizations?
I think I'll start off. So I think there's five, if people like to write down bullets when they listen to conferences, I know I do. So I think that when we're looking at the complexity of what we've got today, the first, I guess, pillar that is a challenge is that we're now going beyond perimeters, especially over the last 2 years.
Absolutely.
We have seen the perimeter implementations expand dramatically. We've gone much further out away from our traditional firewalls than we've ever gone before, requiring us to adopt more cloud, of requiring us to do device management and all kinds of endpoint security. So the complexity of our environment now is beyond perimeters.
And the attack.
The second is the attack surface has just grown. Sure. Yeah, and I think the second pillar would be beyond malware. Everything it seemed to be all about malware. And now it's all about ransomware and fileless attacks and non-malware attacks. And so I think that behavior is becoming more important.
Yes.
Not just signatures and triggers, but a combination of things in succession. This happened and this happened and this happened to these kinds of devices and we've seen this behavior before, and the behavior is more interesting than the actual data in itself. So that's the second. The third challenge, I would say, is that we have too many tools. The more tools we get, the more chance of misalignment, misconfiguration, and missed behavioral context. So whether you're using New Relic or App Dynamics or VMware or Dynatrace, I'll name some competitors, Science Logic, I keep going. Yeah. Right, all these guys are important feeds, but we haven't quite figured out how to make all those feeds relevant. And so we rely on humans to do it. And that's where BigPanda comes in and says, wait, that's what we do, right? That's what we do. So that's why they have this conference. The fourth area of complication is that we have too many silos.
Right.
Is that even, if we get the perimeters and we get the behavior and we get the tools all aligned, the data itself is still very siloed in many environments. I mean, we've been talking about the silos of NOC and SOC just at the high level, but then we still have silos within our organization that don't really share data well. And then last, I would say the fifth area of challenge is that we don't have enough context. So our apps, our infrastructure, our threat intelligence that's being fed in, those different things are coming together. And while they will throw out all kinds of noise, that we don't have enough context in the noise to know what's important and what's not. And that's what Roger was just saying or maybe you were saying it, is that, we're just throwing away a lot of stuff and we're just, we're rubber stamping stuff because we don't know what to look for. And given that we are in a whole different heightened state of security in this country around cyber, it's never been more important for us to figure this out, to figure out those 5 pillars of kind of complexity around this challenge.
Awesome. That was a great answer, Craig. And so, Roger, do you have anything to share? So the question was, what's needed for AI and automation to work properly? And I know, you have anything to add?
Yeah, no surprise, once again, very much aligned with the 5 points that were just reviewed with everybody. But I'll camp on top and say that one of the nuances that you might have picked up on some of the things I was saying before is about how the infrastructure is set up. So the legacy model of, hey, your perimeter is changing. We've all heard that a bunch of times. The world is changing around us. It really ties back to the importance of implementing zero trust, micro segmentation, Things like that in the infrastructure. It's unfair for infrastructure to simply say, hey, we're going to build this thing and you all figure out subsequently how to monitor it and secure it. That partnership between all of those players needs to be super tight and drive towards a much tighter infrastructure, which will end up reducing the number of alerts as you move closer to a zero trust type environment.
Awesome, man. No, that well
Hey,
said.
Chris, I'll jump in here real quick.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I did a bunch of research on AI ML, especially in the space for this. And I think what's interesting is, what is needed is a platform that will allow developers and data scientists to bring algorithms together in a common platform that can apply it to a contextual challenge or a contextual mission. I know it sounds like really high level, but I'll get really specific.
Okay.
A lot of products will come out and they'll say, hey, we do AI ML and we do it in this fashion and we attack this problem. And then you end up being in the same boat where, hey, I've got to buy a bunch of different AI ML tools.
Right.
Because all these tools do separate things. Where I'm seeing some real interest is when you look at what the Department of Defense is doing with the JAIC, right? The Joint Artificial Intelligence Center. Mm-hmm. They have a very different approach to it. They're saying, hey, we're gonna create a framework and we're gonna create a marketplace, and people are gonna bring their own algorithms based on the kind of data they need to make sense of and what kind of sense they want to make of that data. And then people can join some of those algorithms together to create even more complex, algorithms. And that is a very interesting model, I think, going forward, is when you take the area of cybersecurity, any tool out there today can't possibly adjust to all the complexities of cyber. Right. And so they might be really strong in one area and weak in another. And if there's a company out there that does a really good job of creating an open framework that people can come together and bring their own sort of context to the data, then suddenly it becomes something that can expand with any customer. And that's going to be an area that I want to watch. And you brought up the kind of the open framework of BigPanda. That interested me as well, that, hey, users can kind of define their own AI algorithms into how they're bringing correlation to the data. Because that is exactly kind of what I'm saying is needed.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Where I think BigPanda comes into play for security teams is BigPanda provides visibility for the rest of the organization. And as we've already discussed, you have the IT side and you have the security side. But at the end of the day, everybody's responsible for security. So my next question to both of you is, how do you envision IT enriching the security side of the house? And is this important?
Yeah, going back to what I said before about the importance of interoperability between all the different teams is more critical now than it's ever been before. So I don't know what choice we have, and I know no one wants more meetings,
right?
But if we can avoid problems up front by agreeing on what's critical, what's an appropriate alert to process, and what the subsequent alert enrichments are. And then you have OLAs with those partner teams that say, it's not just me on the response side. You owe me a quality alert up front. That's, that conversation frequently doesn't happen. And you find SOCs and NOCs falling into kind of a Stockholm syndrome of, well, this is a crappy situation, but it is what it is. And I just process all these alerts because that's what I do day in and day out.
Right.
And that's just not acceptable, right? You should have that conversation to push for quality.
Craig, any input?
Yeah, I'm just thinking this through. Like, if you think about it, the SOC is the big brother of the NOC, right? It's the overwatcher.
The backstop.
So, I've been in meetings with CISOs where the network operations center manager will meet with us and then leave as the CISO comes in because he doesn't even want to be in the same room with them.
Whew.
And part of that is, the security operations center does nothing but find fault with the network operations center and the way they've implemented things.
Right.
So, the NOC has, in many cases, they see it as an adversarial relationship. You hope not, but they do in some places.
Right.
And so, how do we get a culture of, it's not our fault and don't check what we're doing because we're doing it right to give up even more data? I think part of the answer is probably going to come in the way the future development of network operations will happen, right? It's inevitable. Take this for a grain of salt. I come from a virtualization company, so I'm very much slanted. But I said this when I was down at the Pentagon last week. Somebody said to me, virtualizing cyber operations from an offensive and defensive perspective, is a challenge. And my answer was, make no mistake about it. It is an inevitability.
Yeah.
It is inevitable, right? We will have a virtual everything, right? There will be no dedicated hardware the way we know it today. GPUs are being virtual. We're working with NVIDIA to virtualize all GPUs. We're virtualizing radio access networks with the big telcos. So the days of hardware being dedicated hardware for purpose is going to be reserved for the high compute, scientific, space exploration kind of industries. Everybody else is going to want to use that commodity or specialized hardware that they can virtualize to optimize. And the moment that happens, we've now moved from a network protocol to a software protocol. And that opens the door for us to have a lot more insight into what's going on, as opposed to using dedicated Cisco or Nutanix environments. We're using OpenShift and other open, software-defined networking protocols. And so suddenly we can virtualize that and we can bring it up into tools a lot easier and get more insight to elements that were kind of siloed off before because of the hardware constraints. Does that make sense, I guess?
Yeah. Roger, anything to add on that?
Just very quickly, I mean, again, everybody's moving in the direction. It offers you more control, more ability to make quick changes that maybe in the past you would have had to wait for some kind of firmware upgrade or something like that. The challenge that comes along with it is there's a lot, if it's open source leaning, there's a lot more vulnerabilities out there conceivably. So you have to be, your threat research team has to be super sharp and ahead of the curve.
Right. Yeah, no, that's good input. Let's see. Threat actors, they don't care whether they're attacking security or IT, right? They're attacking the weakest link in the tech stack. So from a security perspective, and to ask my next question a different way, how do you see IT ops enriching security teams and providing better visibility before the threat gets too big to remediate? Or is that even possible? Because we all know that if we can find these threats when they're really, really small, they don't turn into something that's very, very big. And Craig, I'll go to you first on that one.
Yeah, so I think that you have to break this into two different buckets, right? The IOCs that we know about and the ones we don't know about. So the ones that we know about, it's a very reactive process. So you have a SIM, you're feeding telemetry, you already have some kind of lineage of those devices. And so when a new IOC drops and it gets fed into one of your threat intelligence feeds, it's going to start triggering alerts, right? And then your SOC will start responding to it.
Yep.
I think that, within, let me speak to VMware a little bit, and then I will speak to kind of just in general. The approach that Scott Lundgren, the president of Carbon Black, and his team made when they built the company was that they were not going to look at the traditional signature-based IOC type of responses. Instead, they were going to take the approach that we were going to look at the behavior of anything that's of interest. And I look at, like, for instance, a process that runs, and I'm going to go a little technical here.
Okay.
But any process that runs in an operating system, they build algorithms that will look at about 22 heuristics of that process. And then they can build a behavior around that process and look at the plurality of processes across an enterprise to say, is this process acting in the same way that it acts in other systems?
Yes.
And if the answer is yes, to what degree? Is it within 99% or 95%? And therefore, if that process begins to move out of normality, the behavior itself becomes interesting without even knowing if there's an IOC alert.
Yep.
It may have nothing to do with a known vulnerability. We just know it's not acting normal.
Correct.
And so the strength of what he built with Carbon Black is what they call fingerprinting. They fingerprint things in the environment so that they know when the fingerprint changes.
Yep.
And so we may not have an alert, but we know. So I think that two things need to happen. One is that we have to take the fingerprinting approach and apply zero trust capabilities or zero trust principles to that. At what
Totally
level
agree.
does the fingerprint change that we are going to trigger a trust alert? And then instantiate some process, either isolate it or block it or allow it, right? That's sort of the first part. The second part is we are going to have to open up our networks to have more direct access to those that are doing threat hunting.
Yes.
Those that are looking for the abnormalities of behavior, not devices and telemetry and IP addresses and Shodans and all the stuff that everybody loves to talk about, right? And everybody, Shodan and and this and source and destination IP. Those are all great. What we're looking for is behavioral change in a network that is a mountain of hairpins, and we're looking for that one hairpin. And that becomes a threat hunter's job. That's what they do.
Yes.
And the network team has got to be able to open up their environment to let people do that kind of real deep threat searching.
Yep. No, I totally agree. That was great. Roger, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, really quick. So when we look at attack sources out there, if we look last year and historically, probably 65 to 70% of all attacks were sourced out of the US. Now, that doesn't mean the bad actors, obviously, in the US. That's where that machine was that was subsequently compromised to be used.
Right.
And there's a much bigger infrastructure there, right? So bigger greenfield to take advantage of, and a lot of tech, your refrigerator, whatever has IP connectivity now, can participate in that. But it's important as it is that we're talking about the fingerprinting and everything that ties with zero trust that we've all been talking about, and that's absolutely critical to secure our infrastructure today. We're seeing a massive amount of people just hopefully not to insult anybody here that doesn't do this, but just standard patching. People in the U.S. are not great. Whenever we find a problem, for example, in Japan, some kind of infrastructure thing, you see that vulnerability drop off the end of the earth within 24 hours because everybody gets the CVE notification, they do their patches, and they move on at that particular point. So it's interesting that, yes, you have to have the discipline of looking for that cutting edge type threat research, but man, you need to also pay a tremendous amount of attention to what is known and just get your patching done.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, Christopher, if you remember, at Verizon, right, the data breach investigation report, it matches everything Roger just said. I mean, it's human beings, it's misconfigurations, i.e. patching, and it's one of the reasons why I think the move to the cloud and virtualization is so powerful is once you are able to push out configurations from a centralized source and get it to proliferate through your environment more easily, without having to go through all these hardware jumps, suddenly you're able to keep up with those misconfigurations a lot easier.
Yeah, I agree. Well, we got a few more minutes left, guys. I want to run through just a couple more questions. We have 5 more minutes in the session. So we're all here today because of BigPanda, and we all know that BigPanda serves as a correlation layer between all of your alerting and monitoring tools and your IT help desk layer. So, my question is, can you get enough enrichment without a tool like BigPanda? I mean, why is it so important to correlate all of that data? I'll go to Craig first.
I'll start. You can without BigPanda, but you're going to be doing it with human beings. So the question is, do you want to throw bodies at the problem? Or do you want to automate and take people out of the loop and you become, like I said, you don't want to be TSA have amazing people and they do great training. But at the end of the day, they're human beings. They make mistakes. And we've seen that, there's reports and everything come out of things that get through security. But um, the question is, do you want to throw a ton of people at the problem, or do you want to, do some tweaking of algorithms and let that sort of get better and better at finding the problem for you so that your people can go focus on other things. And you could build your own tool, right? I mean, some of the stuff is open source. You go build your own. And the question is, are you in the business of doing software development to build security tools, or are you in the business of a bank where you're supposed to be doing banking and this tool already does it for you? And so, anytime I say, do you build or buy or staff, the question becomes, ask yourself, what's the most important to you? Is it the core business you're in? And is this tool going to prevent you from hiring a bunch of people to do what the tool does best? And so I think BigPanda has that sweet spot that most people looking at it will say, I don't want to throw 5 people at this because I can't keep control of it. I want to have one person do it and have better correlation. And I'm not going to go build my own product out of open source tools.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah.
Roger.
Just to camp on top again, one of the main buying decision points for us to go with BigPanda was the fact that we could do a lot on our own. We optionally could go to their professional services, and we certainly will for the more complicated items. But in the knock and SOC, we live in a quickly evolving world. And when we're changing that often, I need to be able to make quick changes on my own to my workflows, to my sensitivities, to my prioritizations. So that was one of the main decision makers.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's a great answer. And I think we're almost out of time. I think I'll end here and hand it back to Aaron. And Craig and Roger, you guys have been great. You really, you answered all the questions. You did well, and thank you so much for taking the time to do this today. Truly.